What do you do when you have a whole meal planned out and the best part of the meal is almost ruined? Stick with me and you'll see how we fix it. Hi, I'm Mary Catherine, and welcome to my table. I'm actually seated here today because our family has a few things to celebrate. We're going to all get together tonight for a big dinner, and we're going to show you in this video a little bit differently than what we usually do. I'll show you all the dishes that we put together for this meal, and you'll even get to see a little snippet of the family gathered around the table. I'm so glad you're here to join me tonight. You know, everything did not go exactly as planned. We had a few snafus along the way. The weather didn't cooperate was one thing, and then we almost had a disaster with the pound cake. But we were able to salvage everything, and the meal is going to come together beautifully. And the best part will be that we're sharing it with people that we love. Okay, so I'm going to go through the whole menu with you, and we're going to timestamp everything in the video. So after you watch the complete video, if you ever want to go back and hit just one menu item to make for your family, you'll be able to find it easily. But what we have for the menu tonight is going to be pulled pork from a Boston butt, coleslaw, corn, baked beans, macaroni and cheese, garlic bread, and then some pound cake with strawberries and whipped cream. Okay, so let's talk about the Boston butt first. So my husband is the grill master in the family. He's got a smoker, and that's what he did for the Boston butt. He took care of that for our meal, and it was delicious. So anyway, this is Darren. He's my cameraman. So I just wanted to introduce you to him today. You want to tell him anything? He doesn't want to talk on camera. Okay. You want to do that again?
No.
So what he did, we actually used 2 Boston butts for this, and he just takes that fat on the top of each of the Boston butts and scores it. And you'll notice that he does that diagonally, 2 different directions. And then he just rubs it with a mixture of kosher salt and pepper. He has a mixture he already keeps made up all the time, and it's just equal parts of that kosher salt and pepper. And so he just rubs it down good all around with the salt and pepper. And then he does it on a slow cook at about 250 degrees. And then once it hits 170 degrees with an internal temperature, he wraps it in foil, and you leave it in the smoker still at that point. And it is ready when it hits 207 degrees. It took a complete 15 hours for him to do these 2 big Boston butts. And this was one part where the weather kind of played a little bit of havoc with us that day. We had some bad storms that were coming in the evening that he was smoking these. He put them on early in the morning, and they were almost finished, but the bad weather was coming, and our smoker is out on a covered back porch, but the weather can still affect it. And so he decided he needed to go ahead and bring those in, take them off, and they were almost up to temperature, but not quite. They were already wrapped in foil at this point, so he just brought them in, and he finished them in our oven, and they already had that good smoky flavor from being on the smoker for so long. So it worked out okay. We did have our electricity that blinked on and off a couple of times, but we kept our power. They were delicious. And then he just used the method where he just kind of pulled the pork apart. When he took the bone out of each of the Boston butts, it just slides right out, and there's no meat on that bone. That's when you know you've done a good job. So it was perfect. Okay, and so next on the menu is the coleslaw. I took care of this, and what I've used was probably 5 to 6 cups of some chopped cabbage, and then maybe about a half a cup of a grated carrot to go with it. And then I took about a half of a sweet Vidalia onion. Now, I think my onion that day was actually very large, so I may not have used quite half of a complete onion, but if it's a normal-sized onion, that's about what you would use. And I dice it really small, and then I take about 1/4 of a cup of sugar. You don't want, at least for this recipe of coleslaw, you don't want it to be very sweet. So all that sugar is going to do is just kind of cut the bitterness of the cabbage. You can make it sweeter if you like a sweeter coleslaw, but we wanted ours to be savory. So about 1/4 of a cup of sugar was just right to cut that bitterness, but not make it sweet. And then I used 2 to 3 teaspoons of salt and about a half a teaspoon to a teaspoon of pepper, and then enough mayonnaise just to bring it together. and it was probably about 3/4 to a cup of mayonnaise that I used. And this is the part where you want to taste it. And you may need to go back and add a little more salt. You may need a little more mayonnaise if it's not quite come together. But I will mention that one thing about this is that the slaw gets juicier over time. So even if you feel like it may not be quite enough mayonnaise now, you may want to hold off on adding any more because it may turn out to be just fine. And you want to taste it for the salt. And if you feel like you need a little more sugar to cut a little more bitterness, this is where you would taste it and tweak those things if needed. But another thing about coleslaw is that the flavors do mesh together better over time as well. So whatever flavors you're picking up on now will be accentuated later. So if there's a good flavor now, it'll be even better later. You may want to keep that in mind as you go back and decide if you need more salt or more sugar. If you don't want to buy your own cabbage and carrot and grate those things up and chop those things up yourself, you can buy the tricolored coleslaw mix that comes in like the 12 or 16 ounce bag at the store. And I've done that before when I'm in a hurry. You can absolutely use that to make your coleslaw and just use the sugar, the salt, the pepper, and the mayonnaise, like I mentioned. And so next on the menu, we had corn. And every summer when the corn comes in season, I go and get several dozen ears of corn and I will shuck it and cut it off the ear and I will prepare it. And I have it in my freezer, and I try to get enough every summer so that it will last me all year long. It stays good for about a year in my freezer. And so it'll last me all year long until the next corn season, the following summer. And this was my very last bag of corn for this year. So I'm ready. It's a good thing that our season for harvesting corn is right around the corner here. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about how I prepare it. Because I'm going to have a video specifically about putting up corn in a month or two when it comes in. Anyway, stay tuned for that corn. So let's move on. The next menu item was our baked beans. And with this, I just took 4 cans of pork and beans. And then I had about, I think maybe 6 slices of bacon that I had already cooked. And I just bake mine in the oven. I do it at a pretty high temperature. I think I did it about 375 degrees. And it usually takes about 15 minutes, give or take. I already had the bacon cooked, and then you just crumble it or cut it up. Then I used about a half a green bell pepper diced and about a fourth of a large Vidalia onion diced. And then I had about 3/4 of a cup of some Sweet Baby Ray's barbecue sauce, and then about a fourth of a cup of maple syrup. And then I think I added dry mustard to this. If you use the dry mustard, you probably want 1 to 2 teaspoons. So anyway, just mix all that up. I put it in my baking dish and baked it at 350. And I think it went for about 40 minutes. And it will still look juicy when it's very hot and you're taking it out of the oven. But as it sits for just a little while, it's going to set up a little bit. So you don't want it to look completely dry when you take it out of your oven. You do still want it to look quite juicy. But like I said, it will set up a little. Okay, moving on. The next dish was macaroni and cheese. I will be honest and tell you that I am still looking for the perfect recipe for macaroni and cheese. This one was really good, and I would definitely give it a try again, but I would probably make a couple of tweaks to it. What I used for this recipe was 16 ounces of the elbow macaroni, and I just followed the directions on the box to boil it. I do salt my water that I boil it in, so you'll want to do that as well. Then we used 6 tablespoons of butter and 1/3 of a cup of flour. And that's where we kind of start to make our roux, our cream sauce that we're going to put on the macaroni and cheese. And once we let that cook with the butter and flour in our big pan for just a minute or two, then we added our milk. And what I used here was about a 12-ounce can of evaporated milk, and then about 2.5 cups of whole milk. You could substitute other milks for that if you want. You could use heavy cream if you want to make it even richer and creamier. You could use half and half. Those would be fine instead of the evaporated milk. And then salt and pepper it to taste. I think for this recipe, I used maybe a half a teaspoon of pepper and maybe a teaspoon of salt. And I honestly felt like this recipe needed a little bit more salt. And I may have had just a little extra of the noodles in this dish. I had a huge 32-ounce box, and I thought I had used half of it before. So I dumped all of it in my water, thinking it was 16 ounces, but it may have been just a little bit over. So that may be why I felt like it needed a little more salt. But I'm just telling you that for your purposes. You know, you may want to taste it before you finish completing the dish and baking it, just to see if that flavor is going to be what you want. And then I used about 8 ounces of some Velveeta cheese that was cubed, and then about 4 cups total of sharp cheddar cheese that was shredded. I'll reserve about a half a cup of that for the topping on the macaroni and cheese. The rest of it's actually going to go into the creamy sauce that we make. And then an optional thing, I think I added some dry mustard to this, but you could also use Worcestershire sauce. And I wish I had had that. I was out of it that day and didn't use it because I didn't have it. But I think that would be a really great addition to give a little more flavor to this as well. So I'm just going to tell you that tip. So I'm going to go back and try this dish again because it was very creamy and very good. I just felt like it needed a touch more flavor. So I'm going to go back and try it again with those little differences and see how I like it. And then the top of the macaroni and cheese, I used about a cup of panko breadcrumbs with just about 2 tablespoons of butter melted. And I just kind of mixed that together. And then I sprinkled that over the top along with that half a cup of shredded cheese that I had reserved. And so just the combination of a little bit of shredded cheese and panko breadcrumbs on top. Baked it at 350. And again, I think this baked for about 35 to 40 minutes. The last item for the main part of our meal was the garlic bread. And I just took the easy route with this. I just bought a loaf of French bread that you can get at your grocery store. And I just sliced it in half lengthwise. And I just put enough softened butter to coat each of the halves, and then sprinkled a little bit of garlic powder and a little bit of parsley on it. And then I baked it in the oven for about 10 to 12 minutes at 350 degrees. And it was just about perfect then. And so before I get into the dessert drama, I just want to show you my table setting. I love setting a pretty table, like I told you before, and I try to keep things just simple and elegant. I don't want it to be too frou-frou. I don't want it to be too fancy. I'm not about that. I just like simple and elegant. That's really my style. These are some dishes. I actually haven't had these dishes for too long. I've just been picking them up in the last couple years. But my grandmother used to have the desert rose pattern. If you know it, you know this is the Franciscan desert rose pattern. And I always loved it when I was growing up. And so a few years ago, I saw it somewhere and it just made me think of her. And so I decided, you know what? I think I want to have some of those dishes for myself. And so I started collecting them. And you can still find them around a good many places. And so now I've got a complete set of them. And so I wanted to use this at the dinner for the family. So I just used it and set a simple table with one plate on top of a charger, a napkin in the middle of it, and just some pretty flowers in the middle of the table. And then we moved those to set our food down the table as well. So that just gives you a little peek at my style here at Mary Catherine's table. All right, let's talk about dessert. We had a pound cake for dessert. And this is a recipe that I have made so many times. I got it years ago from a lady at a congregation, a church that we went to. And she was so sweet. She shared her recipe with me. And it is the best pound cake recipe that I've ever had. I've made lots of different recipes through the years. I always come back to this recipe because it's so delicious. All right, but something happened after I baked this pound cake. And I'll show you all about that in a little bit. Okay, so here are the ingredients for the pound cake. Really simple, just like most pound cakes. 3 cups of plain flour, 3 cups of sugar, 1 1/4 cups of shortening, all vegetable shortening, 5 large eggs, half a teaspoon of baking powder, and 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 2 teaspoons of vanilla, or any other flavoring. If you want to change the flavoring, you could, and 1 cup of milk. Okay, now you need to have all of your ingredients room temperature for this pound cake. So your eggs and your milk need to be sitting out for quite a while before you start this process. That's the best way to make this pound cake. So you start out by creaming your shortening and your sugar together. And once you've done that, then you add your eggs one at a time. And you mix very well in between each addition of the next egg. In fact, she didn't write this on the recipe, but she told me that she mixed it 5 minutes after each egg. And I have tried that before, and it's very good that way. I usually tend to do mine maybe 2 to 3, 4 minutes, and I think it does just fine as well. So, but just be sure to mix it really well in between each egg. And then you want to sift your flour, measure it again, and add your other dry ingredients like the salt and the baking powder, and then sift it one more time. And so then what you do is kind of a standard way to do pound cakes. You alternate your dry and your wet ingredients. So you add about, maybe a third of the flour, a third of the liquid, the milk, and the vanilla, and then just kind of go through that process until you've done both of them. Once you have added all of your flour into the pound cake, you do not want to mix it anymore. Because as always, when you're baking something with flour in it, you typically do not want to overmix it. It can make it tougher, and you don't want that to happen. So as soon as your last bit of flour is incorporated very well into the cake batter, stop mixing. You're done. Then you add it to a tube pan that you have already greased and floured. Just pour all of your cake batter into it and then put it in a cold oven at 325 degrees. And this pound cake is going to bake for about 90 minutes, about 1.5 hours. You can see that when we took our pound cake out of the oven, it looked perfect, and it usually does. It makes something about, I think, starting it in the cold oven and then maybe just the way that you mix the ingredients as well. It makes the nicest crispy top to this pound cake. The outer edge is so crispy and the inside of it is so soft and fluffy. It's just a delicious combo. It's one of my husband's favorite things that I ever make. In fact, he would complain and tell you I don't make it often enough for him. It turned out great, but the problem came in where I was trying to do a little something different to let it cool, and I had turned the pan over and the whole cake ended up falling out of the pan at the stage that I wasn't expecting it to. And it was very hot still. I had not let it sit for 10 minutes. Typically, I don't even try to take it out of the pan. And I wasn't trying to take it out of the pan this time, but it fell out. And I did not expect it to. So it had just come out of the oven, and it's too hot to do that yet. You cannot take it out while it's hot. You have to let it sit at least 10 minutes. Because of what happened, it all just kind of started crumbling and falling apart. But I knew it was still going to taste delicious. So we did not let that ruin our meal. So what I did, I just let it complete the cooling process. And once it had done that, then I just cut it into bite-sized chunks. And I just got a nice pretty bowl. And just before dinner, I layered it in the bowl with some strawberries and some whipped cream. And so we just kind of made a pound cake trifle out of it, a pound cake and strawberries trifle out of it. And it was delicious. It really was. I will say, if you have to ever fix a disaster in that way with pound cake, the strawberries are very juicy. So you really want to wait until right before your meal to do that, because the pound cake will get soggy. It'll still taste delicious, but you still want to have a little bit of that crustiness that I talked about with the edge of the pound cake. So do that, just as close to time to eat it as you can, and it will be delicious. And I will tell you that what could have been a disaster turned out not to be at all, because we had people that went back for seconds on dessert. And I even heard some people talk about going back for thirds. I don't think they did, but that's how good it was. People really enjoyed it. So it was not a disaster at all, even though it looked terrible. We just salvaged it and made it into something else, and it turned out great. And so I hope you can learn a lesson from that too. Even when something doesn't happen exactly the way you intend, try to think outside the box and turn it into something else, and still use it if you know it's going to taste good. It'll be just fine. Your family will love it too. We enjoyed having all the family here. You can see everybody sitting around eating, passing dishes. I just want you to know the little snippet that you're going to see of family, none of it was staged at all. It was all just off the cuff. I don't even think that people knew somebody was holding a video camera at the moment because it's a tiny little camera.
This is really good.
All right, let's do that again, Mom. But this time, make it real.
Well, I did the first time.
But anyway, and you'll even see after the meal, people kind of split up. Some stayed at the table and talked. Some went into the living room and played a board game. The little girls went into the playroom / den, and they were hiding and playing in there in their little kitchen and just having a good time. We really enjoyed showing you this whole meal from start to finish. I hope you enjoyed it too. If you like this format, let us know. Give us a comment and let us know if you prefer this or if you just prefer seeing one dish at a time. We want to give you what you want. Part of our purpose here at Mary Catherine's Table is just to help you with things in the kitchen, to give you confidence to do things that maybe you thought you couldn't do. Because I really believe anybody can cook, anybody can bake. They aren't as hard as we think they are sometimes. So I hope that you will join me on this journey and learn to make a few new things and gain the confidence to do that for your family. Thanks so much for joining me at Mary Catherine's Table. Hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this. And remember, go out and find somebody who needs a little bit of kindness today and give them some of yours.